The cruelest twist? The Mafia boss kidnaps her to save her life. This story is evil in the smartest way. She finally gets pregnant and boom, a plot twist. The baby belongs to a crime empire. So naturally, she thinks the scariest man in the city is her villain, but then the script flips the knife. He's not hunting her to destroy the baby, he's dragging her into a fortress because every rival gang now wants to cut his air out of her womb. That's what makes this hook hit so hard. So she didn't choose a bad man, she chose the worst possible DNA in the worst possible city.
The case originates with the foundational human impulse, the drive for procreation and the construction of a normative life. Within a sanitized clinical setting, a future was selected from a digital interface, a sterile transaction engineered for security and discretion. The subject was unaware that the genetic material she procured originated not from an anonymous benefactor, but from the East Coast's most formidable purveyor of mortality. The moment this biological link was discovered by the criminal underworld, the carefully designed architecture of her existence was slated for catastrophic failure. She believed she had purchased a dream. Instead, she had initiated a conflict with its epicenter, located at the Lane Institute of Family Planning in a Boston high-rise. The clinic's operational security was such that it eschewed all advertisement. Admission was granted solely through vetted referral. For Scarlett Hayes, a 32-year-old architectural conservator, securing a consultation required 6 months and a significant depletion of her financial assets. She now sat in the reception area manipulating a silver ring, a clear kinetic manifestation of her anxiety. The room's olfactory profile was a peculiar synthesis of expensive floral displays and antiseptic, a scent engineered to pacify a high-net-worth clientele. Scarlett did not belong to this demographic. She was, clinically speaking, a subject experiencing acute distress from biological imperatives. Following 2 failed engagements and a severe medical diagnosis, she was present to execute a plan for her future. She had resolved to bear a child through her own volition. A nurse in immaculate white escorted her to the opulent office of Dr. Alistair Lane. He was an individual with silvered hair, the practiced confidence of a politician, and the detached gaze of a predator. He indicated a seat before his monolithic desk. "Scarlett, excellent. We are prepared to proceed," Dr. Lane stated, his finger tracing a path across a tablet. "Your serology reports are optimal. Hormonal levels are ideal. We simply need to finalize your selection." He presented the device to her. The screen displayed a numbered file. Profile 409, Italian-American, 6 feet 3 inches. Profession listed as private equity. His medical history was flawless, with no genetic markers for disease and a superior intellect. Critically, no photographs were included, a protocol the Institute enforced to maintain the anonymity of its prominent clients. In lieu of a face, the profile contained a brief audio sample of a low, resonant voice reciting a nonsensical poem, followed by a list of physical attributes: dark hair, startlingly pale blue eyes, a powerful physique. "He's perfect," Scarlett vocalized, her tone subdued. The profile presented as an idealized construct. She requested confirmation that the donor had relinquished all paternal rights, seeking absolute assurance that her child's environment would be under her sole control. Dr. Lane offered a well-rehearsed, placating smile. "Profile 409 is one of our most confidential assets. The donor made this deposit years ago, preceding a high-risk surgical procedure. He possesses no paternal inclinations. A formidable non-disclosure agreement legally binds him. He is a memory, Scarlett, merely the genetic material for the life you intend to construct," the doctor concluded. She expelled a breath, indicating a release of sustained tension. "Okay, let's proceed. Let's create our baby." The insemination was conducted 2 weeks later. 4 weeks subsequent to that, Scarlett was perched on the edge of her bathtub, observing a small plastic device. 2 distinct pink lines were visible. Her hand moved to her mouth as tears, a physiological response of pure, unadulterated joy, streamed down her face. She was pregnant. The next 4 months elapsed in a positive affective state, marked by vitamin regimens, ultrasound scans, and the painting of the nursery in her Cambridge residence, a muted creamy yellow. At 18 weeks, she detected the initial delicate fetal movements. A male, it would be a son. She had never before experienced a state of such complete contentment. She existed within a flawless, peaceful, psychological construct. She was, of course, unaware that a traumatic event was imminent. The subject, known as Gabriel Rossi, did not engage with memories. He specialized in creating ghosts. 30 miles from Scarlett's tranquil environment, within the cavernous, damp basement of a waterfront warehouse, the atmosphere was saturated with the chemical markers of fear and hemorrhage. Gabriel, the head of the Rossi family, casually removed a single droplet of blood from his Tom Ford suit. At 34, he possessed a chillingly placid demeanor and controlled the city's criminal ecosystem with absolute authority. A terrified, blood-covered accountant was secured to a chair before him. "I will pose this question only once more, Ree." Gabriel's voice was a low, controlled frequency. "What became of my money?" The $3 million allocated for laundering through his network of clinics had disappeared. "Lane?" the accountant articulated through a mouth full of blood. It was Dr. Lane. He had accumulated massive gambling debts. The Irish were pressuring him. He diverted the capital, Mr. Rossi. He drained the accounts to settle his obligations. Gabriel's pale blue eyes narrowed fractionally. Dr. Alistair Lane. Gabriel was an investor in the Institute, utilizing it as a sophisticated facade for his operations. However, his connection to that clinic was also substantially more personal. 5 years earlier, prior to a surgery that nearly left him permanently disabled, Gabriel had stored genetic material at the facility. It was a contingency plan his father had insisted upon, to guarantee the continuation of the Rossi lineage should he expire during the procedure. The surgery was successful, and Gabriel had long since ceased to recall the deposit's existence. "Silas," Gabriel said quietly to his second-in-command, a large figure positioned nearby. "Handle Ree and prepare the vehicles. We are going to visit Dr. Lane." An hour later, the Lane Institute's elegant glass entryway disintegrated. It was after midnight. The building was dark, but Gabriel and his 3 associates neutralized the security systems with ruthless efficiency. They located Dr. Lane in his office, frantically stuffing bundles of cash into a leather satchel. Lane became rigid as the door clicked shut, revealing Gabriel holding a suppressed Beretta that seemed an extension of his own arm. "Departing so soon, Alistair?" Gabriel inquired, his tone deceptively casual. "Gabriel, Mr. Rossi, I can account for the funds. It's a simple misunderstanding. I intended to repay every single dollar." Gabriel raised a hand, silencing him. "The money is of no consequence to me, Alistair. $3 million is an insignificant sum. What I require is loyalty, and you have violated that requirement." He gave a short nod to Silas, who forced Lane's face into the polished desktop. On the office computer, Silas accessed the clinic's secure database. "Retrieve the inventory," Gabriel commanded. "I want a complete audit of what this parasite has been distributing." Silas's fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard, bypassing the encryption in seconds. Lists of client names and biological information populated the screen. Then, abruptly, Silas ceased all movement. His entire body went rigid. "Boss," Silas said, his voice strained and altered, "you need to observe this." Gabriel moved behind the desk. Displayed on the monitor was the access history for Vault 7. Gabriel's own high-security vault. Asset profile 409. Status: liquidated. The transaction date was 5 months prior. The recipient was one Scarlett Hayes, a civilian with no documented syndicate affiliations. An oppressive silence permeated the room, so dense it felt difficult to respire. Gabriel stared at the monitor, his pale eyes darkening like a brewing storm. The reality of the situation registered with the force of a physical blow. His genetic lineage, the Rossi heir, had been illicitly sold. It was gestating inside a complete stranger. Gabriel's hand moved with shocking speed, his fingers closing around Dr. Lane's throat, pulling him up from the desk. "What have you done?" Gabriel snarled, his mask of composure fracturing to expose the primal aggression beneath. "I required the funds," Lane rasped, his face becoming cyanotic. She was desperate. "She remitted $500,000 in currency for Premier Genetics. I altered the records. I assure you she has no knowledge of your identity. She believes you are an investment banker." "You sold my son," Gabriel stated, the words having a visceral, toxic quality. If his rivals, the Corsetti clan, were to learn of this, they would not hesitate. They would locate the woman, they would terminate her and his unborn child to eradicate his legacy. Gabriel released Lane, who collapsed to the carpet, inhaling sharply. Without looking, Gabriel aimed the Beretta and discharged it twice. The soft reports from the suppressor were the final auditory stimuli the doctor ever processed. "Erase the servers. Incinerate this entire facility," Gabriel ordered Silas, his voice completely level and devoid of affect. "And I require all intelligence on Scarlett Hayes. Her place of employment, her residence, the air she breathes. Locate her before sunrise." The storm finally broke over Boston as Scarlett was securing her front door. Rain swept the streets, driven by a violent wind. She was precisely 22 weeks pregnant. She placed a hand on the gentle curve of her abdomen, sensing a faint, reassuring flutter. "I am aware, my little one," she murmured, smiling. "Mother is en route to acquire the ice cream now. It is a promise." Scarlett deployed her umbrella and began a short walk to a local store, but the streetlights were malfunctioning, casting the block in an unusual dramatic illumination. Her street, normally active with late-night academics, was unnervingly quiet. As she turned the corner onto Elm Street, a blacked-out SUV was idling, its engine a low rumble beneath the storm. A sudden, primal fear activated within Scarlett, a cold sensation unrelated to the rain. Her dormant survival instinct, long unnecessary in her secure world, became acutely active. She increased her pace. It was a tactical error. The SUV's doors opened in unison. 3 men in suits emerged into the deluge, creating a barrier that obstructed her path. Scarlett exhibited an acute stress response, her cardiac rhythm accelerating palpably. Her grasp on the umbrella became a convulsive clench as she executed a single, backward step. "Excuse me," she articulated, her vocal cords producing an uncontrollable tremor. "You are obstructing my path." The figures remained immobile. Subsequently, the vehicle's rear door disengaged, presenting the architect of the situation. The ambient storm seemed to defer to his presence. He was a figure of absolute authority, his broad form encased in a dark coat over a costly suit. As a street lamp flickered above, his features were illuminated. A defined jawline, rain-plastered hair, and irises of a startling, penetrating azure. The clinic's audio file detonated in her consciousness, a factual impossibility. The donor was intended to be an abstraction. He was meant to be a clinical entry, a phantom within the controlled framework of her future. Scarlet Hayes. The name was delivered in a low baritone reminiscent of a subterranean seismic shift. It was the voice from the recording, the one that had previously evoked maritime poetry in her mind. Its former warmth was now replaced by a frigid, undeniable authority. "Who are you?" she demanded, her hands reflexively moving to shield her abdomen as she averted her gaze. "How do you know my identity?" Gabriel advanced. A predatory assessment scanned her, the saturated coat, the manifest terror in her eyes, before fixating on the curve of her stomach. A powerful proprietary instinct activated within him. "I am Gabriel Rossi," he declared, halting precisely 2 feet from her. The deluge itself seemed to recoil from his form. "And you," he continued, "are carrying my property." Respiration ceased in Scarlett's lungs. Rossi. The name registered as a somatic shock. In this city, Rossi was a synonym for absolute control of the docks, the unions, the very mechanics of politics. They were, in clinical terms, the Mafia. "No," she exhaled, a denial born of pure instinct as she retreated. The umbrella slipped from her grasp, its impact echoing on the wet pavement. "No, this is an error. I used a clinic. An anonymous donor was remunerated," the file stated. "The file was a fabrication," Gabriel interjected, his voice sharp as polished steel. "Dr. Lane settled his debts with an asset not his to leverage. He sold you my lineage. A petty criminal constructed your ideal future, and tonight he paid the final price for it." The implication of his words struck her with the force of a physical assault. Paid the final price. Limbic fear overrode all cognitive processes. Scarlett pivoted and fled, a desperate sprint into the storm's fury. The slick ground was irrelevant. Escape was the sole imperative. She covered less than 15 feet. A rapid movement and powerful arms encircled her torso, deliberately avoiding her gravid abdomen, lifting her from the ground as if she were a doll. A raw scream erupted from her throat as she struggled, a captured animal, her fists striking dense muscle. "Release me! Somebody help!" she shrieked, her kicks ineffectual. Gabriel immobilized her arms with a steel-like grip, yet his hold remained meticulously gentle around their child. "Cease your struggles, Scarlett. Had I intended you harm, it would already be done." He transported her to the car, depositing her onto the plush leather seating. He followed her inside. The heavy door's closure was a final sound-nullifying act that sealed out both the storm and her cries. In front, a man identified as Silas engaged the locks, and the SUV moved from the curb with chilling efficiency. Scarlett pressed herself against the far door, her breathing ragged and shallow, tears and rain mingling on her face. "What is going to happen to us?" she sobbed, her hands cupped protectively over her belly. "I swear I had no knowledge. Take any money. I will disappear. I'll sign any document. Just allow me my child." Gabriel removed his damp coat, his expression unreadable as he observed her psychological unraveling. The subject, Scarlett, was a non-combatant plunged into an ongoing syndicate conflict. "Your comprehension of your current predicament is deficient," Gabriel asserted, his tone a study in controlled aggression. "My world operates on a single currency, bloodline. The corsetist discovering a Rossi heir in an unsecured civilian subject would precipitate a violent extraction. The subject exhibited an acute stress response. You solicited a donor, he observed, establishing dominance. You acquired a sovereign, and my lineage does not incubate in unprotected environments. Her response was a predictable amalgam of fear and defiance. What is your objective? To imprison me and seize the child. My objective, Gabriel corrected, is your survival. Effective immediately, your former identity is nullified. Your residence vacated, your employment terminated. You're now an asset of the Rossi family. This is kidnapping. This is security, he retorted, his voice devoid of affect. A formal welcome, Scarlett. The transport proceeded toward the fortified Rossi compound, her sequestration imminent. A tremor passed through Scarlett's frame, her hand protectively shielding her stomach within the car's climate-controlled interior. She had expended all her resources to construct a quiet, predictable life. She had instead purchased a beautiful cage, secured by the very monster who fathered her child. She awoke to the aroma of coffee and a profound, unsettling silence in a room of excessive scale. Morning light streamed through immense glass panes, causing her to squint. For one merciful second, her memory was a void, before the complete trauma of the previous night descended. This was not her apartment. It was a vast suite, resembling a feature on modern architectural fortresses. The chamber was paneled in dark, imposing walnut. The bed linens were of an impossibly high thread count, and the door was secured from the exterior. Scarlett sat upright, her hand moving instinctively to her abdomen. "We're all right?" she whispered to the fetus, her voice containing a slight tremor. "We are still secure." On the bedside table was a silver tray holding hot decaf, a plate of prepared fruit, and, with unnerving precision, the specific prenatal vitamins she consumed. Beside them was the lotion from her own bathroom. Her personal space had been thoroughly compromised. They had catalogued and moved her life while she was sedated. A quiet click signaled the heavy door opening, revealing Gabriel Rossi in a flawless charcoal three-piece suit, lacking a tie. His appearance was less that of a common criminal and more of a ruthless corporate strategist, which functionally he was. "Morning," Gabriel's baritone voice commanded the large room. He did not inquire about her sleep. He simply moved to the window, occupied a leather chair, and observed her with those cold, azure eyes. "You cannot contain me," Scarlett said, drawing the sheet to her chin, projecting a confidence she did not feel. "I have employment, a life, medical appointments. My absence will be noted. Your office received an email from your account at 6 a.m., Gabriel replied coolly, crossing one leg over the other. "You accepted a lucrative, urgent contract to restore a chateau in Switzerland. Your lease has been terminated, the penalty remitted. Your possessions are in a storage facility I have rented. For your medical needs, Dr. Harrison, a premier OB in the state, is establishing a private clinic for you on the ground floor. You will lack for nothing." Scarlett could only stare, aghast at the surgical precision with which he had excised her from her own life. "You erased me in a single night." "I secured you," Gabriel countered, his jaw set. "You perceive yourself as a prisoner. This is an incorrect assessment. You are the vessel for the next Rossi. Outside these walls, you are a target. Inside, with 50 guards and steel perimeter fences, you are royalty." "I have no desire to be royalty," she retorted, frustration inducing hot tears. "I simply wanted a child. I purchased a specimen from a fertility clinic. I did not consent to involvement with organized crime." Gabriel rose and traversed the room in 3 measured strides. He stopped by the bed, his tall form obstructing the morning sun. The air became thick with notes of citrus and latent violence. "You did not purchase a specimen, you purchased my bloodline," Gabriel hissed, his voice descending to a dangerous register. "And that bloodline is not solely your concern. The Corsettis have attempted to eradicate my family for 3 generations. If Dominic Corsetti learns of your existence, your naivete will offer no protection." Gabriel then articulated a horrific contingency. Corsetti would have the fetus surgically removed from her body as a strategic statement. Her reality was now reduced to a simple mandate. She would remain. She would ingest his food, be monitored by his physicians, and her sole function was to carry the pregnancy to term. The weight of his directive finally shattered her denial. She analyzed his eyes and saw only a stark, unyielding truth. "I understand," she managed to say. "Good," he replied, his stoic mask returning. He summoned a maid, Clara, and scheduled a physician's examination. Thus, for the subsequent 3 weeks, Scarlett became an inmate in an opulent prison. She was permitted to ambulate the expansive grounds, though consistently shadowed by a heavily armed guard named Matteo, who maintained a strict 20-pace distance. A private chef was at her disposal, as were a personal pool and a library of rare books Gabriel had procured for her. He managed her like a priceless, unstable asset, making inquiries twice per day with clinical questions regarding the fetus's status. There was no human element to it. She was the incubator for his dynasty. But Scarlett is an architect. She is trained to perceive structure and identify its fractures. She observed the staff, documented the guard rotations, and constructed a mental schematic of the estate. And she focused her analysis on Clara, the maid, who presented as a case study in raw anxiety. The domestic staff avoided all eye contact with security, her brow displaying a consistent sheen of perspiration despite the residence's cool climate. One afternoon, in her quarters, the subject Scarlett's hand made contact with a hard object concealed deep within her bedding. It was an untraceable, disposable communication device. Her cardiac rhythm accelerated violently. She directed her gaze toward the lavatory where the maid Clara was drawing a bath, the sound of running water providing a useful acoustic screen. Scarlett activated the device. A single text message was present. "We are aware of your captivity. Extraction is possible. Southgate, 2 a.m. D.C." The subject experienced sudden hypoxia. D.C. Dominic Corsetti, the rival alpha. The subject Scarlett remained immobile, the device's cheap polymer casing feeling like a source of high-voltage current in her hand. The offer presented a cognitive illusion of freedom, an egress point, a method of ceasing to exist in her current reality. For a brief interval, she allowed the fantasy, a nocturnal flight toward presumed safety. But Gabriel's clinical certainty then dominated her thoughts. "He will excise that fetus from your body." Why would a primary adversary facilitate her escape? The logic was flawed. His aim would be to neutralize Gabriel by eliminating his heir pre-parturition. This was not a rescue. It was a summons to a dual termination event for herself and her unborn male child. Scarlett rose to her feet. She rejects the impulse for a hasty departure or a clandestine 2 a.m. escape. A barrier of conditioned composure within her fractures, and she exits her suite, oblivious to a staff member's startled vocalization descending the main staircase with the momentum of a focused aggressor. Mateo materializes from the architectural shadows of physical obstruction. "Miss Hayes, you require rest." Her reply was sharp and imperative. "Take me to Gabriel. Immediately." Though stunned, Mateo's conditioning compelled obedience, and he guided her into the west wing toward Gabriel's study. After a single, percussive knock, the door opened, revealing Gabriel and Silas examining schematics, their attention immediately diverted by the protocol breach. Gabriel's gaze reflexively dropped to her abdomen, a rapid threat assessment of the fetus before meeting hers. "Report," he demanded, his tone incisive. Scarlett advanced, placing a burner phone forcefully onto his desk. "Your security protocols have been compromised," she declared, her statement punctuating the sudden silence. "Clara supplied this. DC claims he can extract me through the south gate tonight." The ambient temperature of the room seemed to drop. Silas uttered a profanity, his hand moving reflexively to his weapon, but Gabriel checked him with a hand gesture. His focus remained entirely on Scarlett, not the object. The cold detachment in his eyes fractured, revealing a trace of astonishment and an unusual measure of respect. "You were presented with an option," Gabriel observed, his voice a low frequency. "You could have attempted escape. You despise this confinement." "I despise being a strategic asset," Scarlett retorted, her hand moving to shield her stomach. "But I am not irrational, Gabriel. I understand Corsetti's objective is not my preservation, but the termination of my child. And whatever pathology you represent to others, you are the sole entity invested in this infant's survival." Gabriel circled the desk, closing the distance between them until he dominated her personal space. His hand hovered over the phone in a predatory pause before he seized it. He shattered the plastic casing, the sharp sound resonating in the tense quiet. "Silas," Gabriel commanded, his eyes still locked on Scarlett. "Locate Clara. I require a full report of her disclosures before you fracture her digits. Then initiate a full lockdown protocol. No ingress, no egress." "Acknowledged," Silas responded, departing with grim purpose. Gabriel refocused on Scarlett, who had begun to tremble as her adrenaline subsided. Without speaking, he placed a hand on her lower back, a disarmingly gentle contact, and guided her toward a sofa. "Sit," he ordered softly. "You are exhibiting tremors. Is it imminent?" she asked, collapsing onto the upholstery. "Corsetti is an individual with low impulse control," Gabriel stated, retrieving a heavy, black Sig Sauer from a concealed compartment and chambering around with fluid expertise. "If his timetable was 2 a.m., his assets are already deployed. Your non-appearance will trigger the assault." As if cued by his assessment, a low-frequency detonation vibrated the ballistic-grade windows. The ceiling light fixture swayed violently. A high-decibel alarm began to sound, flooding the compound with its urgent signal. The main lights failed, immediately supplanted by an unnatural crimson emergency illumination. "The south gate," Gabriel growled. The subsequent audio was of complete systemic collapse, the sharp, percussive sounds of automatic weapons fire originating from the grounds. Scarlett inhaled sharply, covering her mouth as the abstract threat became a tangible, immediate reality. The scenario of a violent conflict was unfolding on her lawn. In an instant, Gabriel was across the room, his hand closing on her arm and pulling her upright. "We are moving to the secure room now." He propelled her into a corridor now filled with organized chaos as his men moved past, issuing commands into air that was thickening with the smell of cordite. They reached the central foyer just as the reinforced front doors absorbed a significant kinetic impact. "Go!" Gabriel commanded, forcing Scarlet behind him as he raised his sidearm. They ran to a concealed entrance behind a large tapestry. He entered a sequence. A heavy steel plate retracted. He shoved her through the opening as the main doors of the mansion disintegrated. Gabriel fired 3 controlled shots toward the breach, neutralizing a masked intruder before pivoting into the safe room and activating the lock. The door sealed with a concussive boom, plunging them into darkness before the bunker's auxiliary power engaged. The space was a reinforced concrete enclosure, stocked with survival equipment. Following the firefight, the abrupt, profound silence was disorienting. Scarlet slid down a cool wall, drawing her knees to her chest in a primal defensive posture. Gabriel was already at a console of monitors, scanning surveillance feeds of the conflict on his property. He was a commander observing the engagement, his expression a mask of cold rage. Suddenly, Scarlet emitted a sharp, pained vocalization, her hands moving to her abdomen. She clutched herself, her eyes wide with alarm. "Gabriel!" He turned, the weapon forgotten, and was kneeling before her instantly. "Are you injured? Is there blood?" "No," she gasped, her eyes clenched shut. "It's not that. It's the fetus." Gabriel's hands halted above her, useless, a rare expression of pure terror crossing his features. With extreme gentleness, he placed his large, warm hand flat against her stomach. Beneath his palm, through the thin fabric of her dress, a firm, distinct kick pushed back. Then a second one. Gabriel became completely motionless. The sounds of the conflict raging outside ceased to register in his perception. He stared at her abdomen, his blue eyes wide with shock, completely destabilized by the life confirming its presence against his skin. This was his first tactile experience of his offspring, not as an idea or an asset, but as a living, reactive entity. He raised his head, his gaze meeting Scarlet's, which were filled with fluid. In the faint crimson light, the distinction between ruthless syndicate leader and captive subject dissolved, leaving only 2 individuals linked by a mutual fear of losing the sole object of significance. For one suspended moment inside the concrete enclosure, the external battle lost all relevance. Gabriel Rossi, a man whose existence was a series of detached, logical calculations, was entirely incapacitated. His hand remained pressed to Scarlet's abdomen, his consciousness focused on the point where his unborn son had just announced his presence. Another small pressure met his palm. It was a silent act of biological defiance against the chaos attempting to overwhelm them. He withdrew his hand, examining his own palm as if it were a foreign object. In that instant, the rigid psychological armor of the Rossi patriarch began to fracture, exposing the man beneath. He observed Scarlet, a trembling form against the cold wall, attempting to minimize her physical presence. "Did you perceive that?" she inquired, her voice a thin signal above the bunker's low-frequency hum. "I perceived it," Gabriel confirmed, his voice strained with an unidentifiable emotion. "This was never about a transactional agreement. It's about a life. His life." He stood, the weapon at his side forgotten, his entire posture shifting from captor to protector. "You are secure, Scarlet. I am wagering my existence on it. You are secure." Before the statement could be processed, a heavy impact resonated through the bunker's massive steel door. The tactical radio on Gabriel's belt activated with a burst of static. "Boss!" Silas's voice, strained but steady, broke the silence. "Hostiles neutralized or withdrawn. We sustained 4 casualties." Perimeter is secure, but the primary structure is a total loss. The emergent warmth in Gabriel's expression vanished, reverting to the cold granite of command. Acknowledged. Prepare vehicles, we are relocating. He offered a hand to Scarlet. She observed it, large, scarred, a weapon itself, and for the first time perceived not a predator, but her only viable means of survival. She accepted his hand, and he drew her to her feet with a grip that was unexpectedly gentle, cognizant of her fragile state. Gabriel entered the code, and the massive door retracted with a pneumatic hiss, revealing utter devastation in the main hall. Scarlet gasped, her hand reflexively covering her mouth. The walnut-paneled walls were shredded with projectile impacts. The historic tapestry that had concealed the doorway was now a smoldering ruin. Under the pulsing crimson emergency lights, shattered glass from the front windows crunched underfoot like fractured ice. The air was a dense mixture of cordite and blood. Two of his operatives were dragging a body in tactical gear from the destroyed entryway. "Avert your gaze," Gabriel instructed, his body moving to obstruct her view of an expanding bloodstain at the staircase's base. He formed a physical barrier, guiding her through the chaotic aftermath. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving a frigid, damp atmosphere. A motorcade of 3 black armored Maybachs idled in the driveway, their headlamps cutting through the darkness. Mateo was positioned by the center vehicle, an M4 carbine held ready across his torso. He pulled the heavy door open upon their approach. Gabriel assisted Scarlet into the leather-upholstered interior before entering beside her. Silas occupied the front. "What is our destination?" Scarlet's voice was unsteady as the convoy accelerated away from the burning estate. "The Seaport District," Gabriel answered, his eyes methodically scanning the dark periphery. "I maintain a secured penthouse at the Ritz-Carlton. It is a ghost property concealed by 3 layers of legal trusts. Its security is military grade. The private elevator is inert without my direct authorization." "And Clara?" Scarlet inquired, her thoughts turning to the terrified domestic who had triggered the night's events. Silas angled his body in the passenger seat. "She is deceased, Miss Hayes. She panicked at the first gunshots and attempted to flee via a side exit. She ran directly into Corsetti's insertion team." They had expended their own operative with no hesitation. A wave of nausea surged in Scarlet's stomach. A woman was dead. Men were dead. All of it originating from a clinical procedure. The sheer mass of the violence felt oppressive. Gabriel noted the loss of color in her face. He retrieved a water bottle from a cooling unit, opened it, and placed it in her hand. "Hydrate," he commanded quietly. "She was only a maid," Scarlet whispered, a single tear escaping. She was terrified. "She was a liability," Gabriel corrected, his tone lacking its usual sharpness. He leaned back, rubbing his jaw. But her presence also indicated a far more systemic problem. Corsetti's operatives had breached the estate's defenses with surgical precision. They possessed knowledge of patrol schedules and the exact configuration of his private sanctuary. Clara was merely a pawn, incapable of holding that level of intelligence. "What is your assessment?" Scarlet's question was a tremor, her hand unstable as she lifted the water. "This compromise originates from a much higher level than a housekeeper," Gabriel stated, his gaze sharpening within the vehicle's deep shadows. "And this has been in preparation for a significant duration. An operation this clean necessitates months of surveillance on my home." A cold dread began to permeate Scarlett's bloodstream as a terrible hypothesis took shape. She studied his profile, alternately illuminated and obscured by the passing Boston cityscape. "Gabriel," she began, her voice a fragile, thin signal. "Immediately before the clinic, my architecture firm was acquired by a private equity group. They relocated my office, issued new security, new phones, new laptops. All of it occurred in exact parallel with the start of my IVF treatments." Gabriel's entire posture became rigid. The silence within the armored vehicle grew dense and suffocating. From his position, Silas turned, his expression a grim reflection of his superior's dawning comprehension. "What was the designation of this group?" Gabriel's voice was unnaturally quiet, stripped of all inflection. "Apex Holdings," Scarlett replied, the name echoing like a pulse in her chest. Gabriel produced a slim, encrypted smartphone. "Silas, I require a deep-level file on Apex Holdings. Cross-reference their executive board against every known Corsetti shell corporation from the last 5 years." The rest of the journey was spent in a strained, unendurable silence. The city lights blurred into an abstract smear as they entered the Ritz-Carlton's subterranean garage. The transfer from the vehicle to a private elevator was a silent, flawless maneuver executed by Gabriel's team. As the lift descended, Gabriel's eyes at last met hers. The cold, impenetrable crime boss had vanished, supplanted by a man just beginning to process the true depth of the conspiracy targeting his bloodline. "If Apex is a Corsetti entity," Gabriel said softly, his words landing with the elevator's arrival chime, "then them locating you was never a matter of chance, Scarlett. You have been under observation from the very outset." The Ritz-Carlton penthouse was the complete inverse of the Rossi Estate's Gothic oppression. It was a sprawling, modern exhibition of glass, steel, and white marble that offered an uninterrupted 360-degree view of Boston Harbor. But for all its sterile beauty, the reinforced doors and armed guards at each entrance confirmed that Scarlett had only been relocated from one opulent prison to another. As the sun rose, coloring the harbor with shades of purple and gold, Dr. Harrison was already present. Escorted by guards, the physician swiftly deployed a mobile medical station within the enormous master suite. Scarlett lay on the bed, her hands twisting the sheets while Dr. Harrison guided the cold transducer of a fetal Doppler over her abdomen. Gabriel stood as a sentinel at the foot of the bed, arms folded. He was without sleep, and the dark stubble on his jaw rendered his presence even more formidable. Abruptly, a fast, rhythmic pulsing filled the room, the sound of a strong, healthy heartbeat. A choked sob escaped Scarlett's lips as her eyes closed, in a surge of profound relief. Tears carved paths from her eyes into her hair. The child was alive. He was viable. "Fetal heart rate is a stable 145 beats per minute," Dr. Harrison announced with a warm smile, holding out a tissue. "No signs of distress, no premature contractions. The fetus has weathered the incident perfectly. You, Miss Hayes, are presenting with elevated blood pressure. I am mandating strict bed rest for the next 48 hours. Gabriel gave the doctor a terse, dismissive nod. "Mateo will escort you out. The equipment will remain." Once they were alone, Gabriel moved the floor-to-ceiling windows, his gaze fixed on the waking city below. The tension emanating from his body was a palpable element in the room. Scarlett sat up, pulling her silk robe more tightly around her. The night's violence had fundamentally altered the dynamic between them. Their mutual antagonism had been cauterized by a shared primal survival instinct. Did Silas find any intel on Apex Holdings? Scarlett's question softly penetrated the silence. Gabriel remained with his back to her, observing the harbor. He confirmed our most severe hypothesis. Apex Holdings is a front. The capital disappears 3 companies deep, terminating at a wealth management firm in Zurich, a firm under the control of Dominic Corsetti. Scarlett felt the air forcibly expelled from her lungs. They had owned her career, her existence. They controlled every variable of your world, Scarlett, Gabriel finally stated, turning to her with eyes like an approaching storm. They operated your building's security. They intercepted your work emails, monitored your calls. The moment you searched for a fertility clinic, they were aware. Defying the doctor's explicit order, Scarlett swung her legs off the bed. Her mind, designed for schematics and load-bearing structures, was now drafting a horrifying new architecture of conspiracy. She rose, walking across the heated marble floor toward him. "Wait," she whispered, her brow creased in intense focus. "You told me Dr. Lane sold my embryo to clear a debt with the Irish mob." "That was the narrative Reese constructed from the ledgers," Gabriel confirmed, his jaw tight. The accountant followed the documented paper trail. "But Reese only perceived the narrative Lane wanted him to perceive," Scarlett countered, the conclusion striking her with the force of an impact. She gripped Gabriel's arm, her fingers pressing into the fabric of his suit jacket. "Consider the probabilities, Gabriel. If Corsetti owned my firm, if he was monitoring my every action, what are the odds that I would randomly choose the single clinic that possessed the Rossi sample where a doctor would somehow make that specific impossible error?" Gabriel's eyes widened as the chilling, deranged logic of her words began to lock into place. "Are you suggesting this was not a random event?" "I'm stating I was selected as a target," Scarlett breathed, a chill moving up her spine. "I am 32, without a partner, no immediate family. I reside alone in a small townhouse with basic security. I was the perfect, undefended subject." She went to the glass desk that held a dossier of the clinic's hacked financials. She sifted through the papers until she located the master ledger, a finger dragging down the columns of figures. "Look," she urged, motioning Gabriel closer. He leaned in, his chest brushing her back, sending a current through her she fought to ignore. "These fund transfers," Scarlett started, tapping a sequence of large payments to Dr. Lane's offshore accounts. $3 million, sent 6 months ago, just after my first consultation. But observe routing codes. This isn't from the Irish syndicate. They use particular crypto tumblers originating from Dublin. Gabriel saw the alphanumeric sequence, his mind identifying the financial fingerprint. The Cayman Islands. That prefix is from a bank utilized exclusively by the Corsetti family. "Lane didn't sell your lineage over a gambling problem," Scarlett uttered, her voice a horrified whisper. "Corsetti compensated him for it. Corsetti paid Dr. Lane $3 million to steal your secured file, implant it in a completely vulnerable civilian, and then release her." A heavy silence filled the penthouse, thick with the audacity of the stratagem. Dominic Corsetti did not simply desire the Rossi line to be extinguished. He had orchestrated a personal theater for Gabriel. He required the child to be born completely defenseless, severed from any Rossi protection, which would allow Corsetti to eliminate them both with ease, the ultimate demonstration of his authority. Subject Gabriel's grip blanched his knuckles on the desk. A visceral growl signaled his homicidal rage. He had been outplayed, using Scarlett as an unwitting pawn. "You were the decoy," Gabriel rasped, his tone toxic. He observed Scarlett's ashen face, her terrified eyes. and the instinct to cover her stomach. She hadn't collected a sample. She'd walked into a masterful trap. He used my body to carry your heir just to murder him and break you, she cried, her self-control disintegrating. She recoiled, her respiration shallow and erratic. I was nothing, a vessel for his retribution. In a startlingly rapid motion, Gabriel closed the distance, enveloping her. The embrace was not tender, but a primal, proprietary act. He consumed her space, muffling her sobs into his own body as a physical anchor to her escalating hysteria. You are no vessel, Gabriel stated, his voice a low vibration by her ear. You are the mother of my heir, and Scarlet, I give you my assurance. Before this week concludes, Dominic Corsetti will drown in his own blood. In response, Scarlet initiated physical contact, clinging to Gabriel. In her perception of this violent reality, the sociopathic figure became her sole protector. An urgent, piercing tone from an encrypted device broke the silence, the secure syndicate line. Gabriel detached, his expression becoming a stoic facade. He approached the desk, observing the illuminated display. The display showed only a sequence of zeros. Activating the speakerphone filled the space with palpable threat. Rossi, Gabriel began, his tone lethally composed. The flick of a lighter and a long exhalation followed. Gabriel, a slick, icy voice responded. I understand the subject has been relocated to the Ritz, a refined selection, superior to your prior stronghold. Scarlet experienced a profound physiological fear response. It was Dominic Corsetti. You have violated protocol, Dominic, Gabriel declared, his fist tightening until his nails broke skin. Involving family is forbidden. The commission will not sanction this. Dominic's response was a derisive laugh. The menace was articulated in a flat, empty voice. The commission, Gabriel, requires proof, not speculation. Officially, Ms. Hayes becomes another unfortunate casualty of a break-in, a tragedy, they will say, especially as she will not carry to term. Gabriel's gaze met Scarlet's, conveying a deadly vow. Harm her, Dominic, and I will make your death a gift. I will obliterate your lineage. Brave words from a monarch in a glass castle, Dominic mocked. Savor the perspective, Gabriel. The terms were now explicit. You have 48 hours to relinquish the port territories. Noncompliance results in the architect's decapitated head, arriving by messenger. The connection terminated. The threat lingered, a promise of utter annihilation. The conflict was no longer covert. The battle had breached their sanctum, leaving no retreat. Lowering the phone, Gabriel regarded Scarlet with chilling determination. Defensive tactics were now obsolete. The hunt would begin. Dominic Corsetti's ultimatum was clear: 48 hours, 2 days before total war. Positioned at the desk, Gabriel was immersed in the detached logic of conflict. Silas, he ordered, his voice devoid of warmth. Mobilize every operative. Deploy all assets at the port. We will cripple their logistics. We will strike their shelters. We will purge them from Boston by sunrise. Gabriel, pause, Scarlet interjected, her tone slicing through his tactical fixation. She stood at the window, observing the city lights. Open warfare is a war of attrition, one you cannot afford. The time is insufficient. We lack the time. Her hand settled on her abdomen. The sole objective is to neutralize the leadership tonight. Dominic is inaccessible, Gabriel countered, turning to her. He operates from the Apex Tower's summit. It is a citadel. Biometrics, fortified structures, and elite ex-military security. A frontal assault is a fatal endeavor. Unless one is aware of its structural vulnerabilities, Scarlett retorted, her eyes showing keen intellect. She retrieved a laptop from her bag. Prior to my transfer to reception, I was the lead preservationist for their architectural portfolio. My company supervised the Apex Tower's structural remodel. Gabriel and Silas exchanged expressions of profound astonishment. He stood over her as she bypassed security protocols she herself probably installed on the laptop. For the valuation, Apex used a large firm, but they hired us to evaluate the building's core stability, she clarified, displaying a three-dimensional schematic. Dominic believes himself omnipotent in his sky fortress. Thus, the subject Dominic concealed a 1930s framework with modern tech, assuming invulnerability. He failed to account for Scarlett. She identified the critical error. To reinforce his penthouse, his crew had sealed, but left void, archaic prohibition service shafts. The word sealed triggered Gabriel's comprehension. Scarlett verified a 3-foot diameter shaft extending from the subway to behind the plaster of Dominic's inner sanctum. The contractors, she added, opted for sheet metal over reinforced concrete, a fiscal choice that would prove fatal. A predatory expression formed on Gabriel's face, a direct route to the enemy's core. He looked at Scarlett, now not just the carrier of his heir, but the architect of his triumph. He was stunned, murmuring she was extraordinary. He addressed his subordinate. Silas, prepare the equipment. We move immediately. 3 hours hence, they traversed sewer conduits. Gabriel, in tactical attire with an automatic weapon. He was flanked by Silas and 6 of his most loyal enforcers. The access shaft was located precisely as indicated on Scarlett's schematics, obstructed by a welded barrier. Silas applied a thermic charge, which liquefied the metal with a soft sizzle. The ascent was a grueling 400-foot vertical climb through a dark conduit. Gabriel was propelled by focused rage, the image of Scarlett and his leveraged heir fueling him. Dominic Corsetti had escalated this to a fight for dominance. The conflict would conclude this night. Reaching the shaft's apex, they paused behind the sheet metal partition. Gabriel detected voices within. He signaled, and his unit assumed their positions. Silas affixed a breaching explosive. Gabriel's countdown was nonverbal. 3, 2, 1. The detonation was controlled, tearing a hole in the wall with a shower of debris. Gabriel emerged from the haze, an avatar of retribution. Dominic's guards, focused on conventional entry points, were tactically blindsided by an attack from within their perimeter. Gabriel's unit operated with clinical efficiency. Suppressed gunfire was the only sound as bodies fell. When the action ceased, only Dominic Corsetti was left standing. He was cornered behind his desk, a gold-plated firearm trembling in his grip, his eyes locked on the breach in his sanctuary. How, he rasped, his tie stained with the subordinate's blood. Impossible. Gabriel moved forward, his own weapon lowered, his expression promising fatality. You purchased the structure, Dominic, but you failed to understand its secrets. Dominic's aim faltered. I will execute you, Rossi. You, the architect and the fetus she carries. Gabriel showed no response. He moved with sudden speed, grasping Dominic's wrist. The sound of snapping bone was distinct. The ornate pistol fell. A knee strike silenced Dominic's outcry, forcing him down. Gabriel stood over him, his own Sig Sauer at Dominic's head. Herein lies your error, he stated. His tone was a menacing sub-vocalization. You perceived my lineage as a vulnerability. You viewed her as a mere biological vessel. The hammer cocking was the sole reply in the blood-strewn office. She represents the continuation of my dynasty. Your narrative has concluded. A single gunshot provided the final punctuation. Afterward, with rain streaking the windows, Scarlett kept vigil. Sleep was unattainable. The door opening triggered a cardiac response. He appeared, his tactical equipment gone, his shirt stained with blood and soot. He embodied brutal victory, marked by deep exhaustion. He moved wordlessly to the bathroom, activating the shower to its highest pressure. Scarlett let the blanket fall and followed him to the entry. She observed him tear away the stained clothing, revealing a torso scarred with a history of violence. He braced himself in the hot spray, a symbolic act of purging the kill. She entered, offering a clean towel, waiting silently. As the water ceased, his guarded expression had dissolved. His gaze connected with hers, showing profound, bone-deep fatigue. "It is concluded," Gabriel breathed. "Corsetti is eliminated. His forces are ceding the port to Silas. The shred is neutralized, Scarlett. You are secure. The child is secure." A suppressed sob escaped her. She placed the towel on his shoulders, embracing him tightly. She pressed her face to his chest, processing the scent of the individual who had annihilated a rival for her. His arms provided stability. "I feared you would not return," she murmured against him. "My return is a certainty," Gabriel pledged, a conditioning tactic to instill dependence. "You and the offspring are extensions of my clan. Threats will be neutralized." 4 months later, his control manifested as a fortified maternity ward. Within this isolated environment, external violence seemed abstract. The subject, Scarlett, now displayed signs of contentment and attachment, a classic progression. Gabriel's constant presence reinforced the newly established bond. The Rossi Syndicate's alpha, a specimen conditioned by extreme violence, exhibited a rare emotional release. He held the male infant, a genetic continuation of his own line. "The specimen is flawless," he vocalized, his affect dominated by profound possessiveness. "He mirrors your scowl," the subject observed, initiating familiar contact. This interaction signaled a paradigm shift in their dynamic. In the preceding 4 months, her perception of confinement had transmuted into a sense of elevated status. His methodical investment included medical supervision and data acquisition, allowing the subject to penetrate his emotional defenses. Her psychological state evolved from captive to consort. "Designation?" he inquired. Scarlett, having rationalized his actions as protective, responded, "Leo, signifying lion?" This satisfied Gabriel's dynastic needs, eliciting an unguarded display of approval. "Leo, the successor." His directives to the infant confirmed megalomaniacal projections. The subject displayed calm as she received the child. 9 months prior, the subject's stated goal was procreation within a stable, solitary life. The outcome was assimilation into a criminal hierarchy and its violent legacy. The subject now perceives Gabriel's physical control as a protective barrier, demonstrating a complete identification with her captor. Her initial transaction at the Lane Institute did not procure an infant. It inadvertently purchased a criminal empire and initiated inter-syndicate warfare. An atypical trauma bond formed under conditions of extreme duress. Gabriel Rossi, a subject defined by violent pathology, fixated on the agent of his potential downfall, a clinical paradox. Their connection was not romantic attachment, but a symbiotic pact for survival. The subject's initial confinement was psychologically reconfigured into a sanctuary of primal allegiance. Within this construct, she satisfied a deep-seated need for kinship. bonding with a clan whose protective instincts were both potent and dangerously unstable.
Let's pause the movie right there. Because the most painful twist in this whole story is not that a mafia boss shows up claiming the baby is his. Sure, that's wild. Great thumbnail. Massive drama. But the real emotional damage starts earlier. It starts when a woman walks into a professional institution, puts her future in its hands, and gets sold into a war by people wearing polished shoes and polite smiles. That is the nerve this story hits so hard. Most people don't get destroyed by obvious villains first. They get destroyed by trusted systems, by contracts, by offices, by experts, by the places designed to feel safe enough that nobody checks the trapdoor underneath the carpet. Scarlett didn't lose her normal life because she made some reckless choice in a dark alley. She lost it because she believed in procedure. She believed that money, paperwork, and professionalism meant protection. That's what makes the betrayal hit deeper. A criminal acting like a criminal is expected. A system pretending to be care while selling someone into danger. That's the kind of betrayal that rearranges a person's soul. And now pause again because Gabriel's side hurts too. He thinks power can seal every crack. He thinks wealth, intimidation, and control can protect legacy. Then fate humbles him in the most humiliating way possible. His bloodline is stolen not through war, but through negligence and corruption inside a system he thought he could manage. That's poetic in the ugliest way. The kingpin who controls the docks cannot control the consequences of trust misplaced in a clinic database. So both of them lose before either of them can fight back. She loses safety, he loses certainty, and that's the life lesson nobody wants but everybody needs. The most dangerous collapse often begins where people feel most professionally reassured. But here's the emotional kill shot. Neither of them survives by clinging to their original fantasy. Scarlett does not get her quiet motherhood. Gabriel does not get his untouchable empire. They only survive once both of them accept reality as it is, not as it was sold to them. That's grown-up strength, ugly, painful, uncinematic truth acceptance. So if this story says anything universal, it says this. Trust is not proven by polished packaging. Safety is not guaranteed by credentials. And when betrayal comes from a place that was supposed to protect, survival begins the moment a person stops mourning the illusion and starts reading the room as it really is.